Have you ever thought about what you can do in a minute? I mean, that's a funny thing to think about, but we use minute all the time in our conversations. We use it in metaphors. We even name products after it. There's minute rice, minute steak, and minute men. We watch up to the minute news. We tell people to wait a minute. We say there's one born every minute. And Don Henley from the Eagles says that New Yorkers have their own. But what if a minute is all it took to help someone who could not read and empower them with the ability to read fluently? And I don't mean just kids who are struggling in school, but I mean those 32 million adults in the US who can't read. And all you needed is a pencil and a timer. Well, before I show you how, let's talk about why. Isn't it remarkable that any of us actually learned how to read? I mean, before a child even enters their first day of school, there's all these skills that are getting developed. From the time they're born, there's sounds that they hear and they imitate. And then there's words, and they start speaking. And then those words are attached to objects and feelings and ideas. And when they go to school, they learn that the sounds and the words they've been hearing and saying are actually related to these abstract images on a page. And soon they're sounding out whole words and reading sentences and paragraphs. So why is it that some kids learn to read so easily, so effortlessly, while other kids can sit there and stare at the same word on the page after page, and never just quite get it? Well, Sally Shaywitz, a neurologist from Yale University, wondered the same thing. So using fMRI technology, she mapped the brains of good readers and poor readers, and she found something really interesting. She found that in the brain of a good reader, there are 3 regions of the brain that are activated, 1 in the front and 2 in the back. But in poor readers, she said they had significant underactivation in the 2 regions of the back of the brain, although the front was activated. So what's going on here, and what does this all mean? Well, neuroscientists call this the interactive theory. Basically, there are 3 essential components for reading: how the word looks, how the word sounds, and what the word means. The back region of the brain, the one that's activated in good readers, is responsible for integrating these 3 components so that when a word is read frequently and correctly, the brain will rapidly recognize it, and then you can read fluently. So what does this mean for our kids that have significant underactivation or struggling? Well, they're often met with, you just need to try harder. And believe me, those kids are trying as hard as they can. But they soon notice that their classmates and their friends are reading and they're not. And they wonder, well, what's wrong with me? And then their parents notice the struggle and they feel helpless because they want to help their child, but they're not sure how. Or they feel hopeless. Will my child ever learn to read? Well, I know, because I was one of those parents. You see, over 11 years ago, I sat on the couch with my then 8-year-old daughter, Jamie, as she practiced her reading for school. She sat there sounding out every single word on the page, even words she had just sounded out. I called it torture reading. After what was 2 very long, exhausting sentences, she stopped and she looked at me and she said, "Hey, Mom, why can't I be like my friends? Why can't I read? What's wrong with me? I must be dumb." You know, that's a heartbreaking conversation to have with your child. But I knew 2 things. I knew, 1, she was not dumb. But I knew, 2, it was going to take more than just sitting on the couch and reading more to get her to be a fluent reader. And so I began my research. I found myself in the classrooms of Morningside Academy, a school in Seattle that's been around for 40 years, helping kids get ahead who had fallen behind in math and reading and writing. Even kids that may have that significant underactivation. It was like walking into a gym where people work out. Instead of working out, though, these kids were working out their brains instead of their bodies. It was like they were reading 200 words a minute instead of bench pressing 200 pounds. And instead of running a 100-yard dash, they're answering math facts up to 100 a minute. And they were doing this with a pencil and a timer. The kids would time themselves on these basic skills like word sounds and word parts and whole words. Their teachers would act as coaches, instructing, guiding, and helping them to reach fluency. They would always try to beat their time so they could improve their score. I found out that this method of learning has actually been around for over 50 years. Started by a behavioral scientist out of Harvard University. He wanted a way to measure objectively whether a student is learning or not. So he figured if he could have them work on a skill and measure them over time, he would get some pretty good data. Well, some of his colleagues said, well, what if we shorten the timing and make it a minute timing? Could we get the same measurement, the same information? Well, they found out several things. They found out, one, yes, they could get the same information that they needed. Two, kids loved being able to time themselves and then beat their time and get better. And three, the kids that were doing the 1-minute timings were actually learning faster than kids who weren't. So it was so precise in their measurement that they gave it a name. They called it precision teaching. Now, precision teaching is not a product. It's not something you buy. It's just something you do with a pencil and a timer. In fact, it's been used in more than just education. It's been used in business to train employees at call centers. It's been used in hospitals to train nurses. It's been used in medical schools to train surgeons. And it's not complex. Anyone can do it. Now, one of the pioneers of precision teaching is Elizabeth Houghton. And Elizabeth says, when we look at kids who aren't reading, we always say, oh, they can't read, they can't write, and they can't say their letter sounds. But she said something very profound. She said, you can't measure can't. So what can you measure? Can you measure the sounds they do know and build fluency from there? And what is it about the minute timing that actually helps kids learn faster? Well, Dr. Andrew Huberman is a neuroscientist from Stanford University School of Medicine. He studies how the brain learns. He says, well, the brain has plasticity, which means we know the brain can change. But he says it learns best with two things, urgency and focus. And when you do a minute timing, you actually have both those things happening at the same time. You have that sense of urgency. I want to get through that timing. I want to beat my time. And focus. I want to get everything right. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? Well, we want fluency. See, fluency is being able to do something without a conscientious effort or thought. Think about something that you're fluent in. Like driving a car. When you first started learning to drive a car, you thought about everything you did, from adjusting the mirrors to putting the key in the ignition, even putting it in drive. You had to think about which way to turn the turn signal. But today when you got in your car, you didn't think twice about any of those things. You just did it. And you'd say, well, that's second nature. And I would say, well, that's fluency. Just recently I was working with a high school student who this fall will be going to college. And reading has always been a huge struggle for her. And so she wanted to be able to improve her reading skills so that she could handle the college material. And when we first started, I was looking at her letter sounds, and she didn't know all of them. And so we began working on that. And she could do about 38 sounds a minute when we started. And I wanted her to reach 120 sounds a minute. So after 5 sessions of working together, which was a combined total of 5 minutes of timings, she went from 38 sounds a minute to 140 correct sounds a minute. So once a week, we would work together and just kind of firm up those particular sounds. And one day she was doing a timing on it, and she got to the end of the timing. She said, it was the worst timing I've ever done. I said, really? On the contrary, that was like the best timing you've ever done. I said, but why do you think it was the worst? And she said, well, it was kind of strange, but I opened my mouth and the sounds were coming out, but my brain wasn't doing any work. That's fluency. You know, precision teaching has been used in some other areas, as I said, but there's one particular story that it was used in a different way to really impact a child's life. The story is about a boy named Terry Harris, and if Terry could stand here today and tell you his own story, he would tell you how precision teaching and the grace of God changed his life. You see, at age 2, he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and when he went to kindergarten, his mother was told he would never learn to read or write or go to a regular school. And so in kindergarten, that's exactly what happened, nothing. But in first grade, all of that changed. You see, in first grade, his first grade teacher was Elizabeth Houghton, the one that says, you can't measure can't. And she looked at Terry and said, what can I measure in him? And she began to build his skills. And that first year, Terry did learn to read and write. But Elizabeth did something even more remarkable than that. See, the school that Terry went to was a 3-story building with no elevator. And for a boy with severe cerebral palsy on crutches, he was not able to climb the stairs in his own school. And so each day, she would take her first grade class, where they would take turns with using the timer, as they taught Terry the component skills to climb the stairs in his own school, until he could climb an entire flight of stairs up and down without any assistance. Terry also did more than that. You see, he graduated from a regular high school. He went to college and earned a bachelor's degree, and he even went on and got a master's, all because of a pencil and a timer. You know, we can't all be like Sally Shaywitz and do fMRIs of kids' brains to find out if they're learning. But we don't have to. We've got this really powerful tool, this timer that can measure kids' learning, but it also helps accelerate their learning. And it's easy to use. I want to show you a video today of a real student who's working on a timing in reading. This timing is a time-lapse video. At the beginning of the timing, you'll see that she's not fluent. In fact, she makes an error. But by the end of the timing, she's fluent. Now, the amount of time it took for her to build fluency was a combined amount of timings of 4 minutes.
To make a cake, Pete went to the shop to get things to make some cakes. He wants lots of eggs and some milk. He does not want ham or fish. He does not want crumbs or grams of nuts when he picks up.
And what about my daughter, Jamie? You know, that was 11 years ago. We had that really heartbreaking conversation. But when I found out how simple and powerful this tool was, we began doing timings with her on all her reading and writing skills. Jamie worked really hard and she persevered to overcome her reading disability. Today, not only is Jamie a 19-year-old college student, but she is also a precision teaching tutor, helping kids to learn to read. With so little time in a day, can you find a minute or two? And when you do, what will you do with your minute?